Welcome everyone to the Watch List, a webinar series for ASX listed companies to pitch to real investors such as yourself, so these companies can be considered for your watch list. Our job is to showcase companies that are on your watch list or to give you ideas of companies you might want to put on your watch list, because we know being on your watch list is a big deal. Today's a bit different to how we normally run these events. Today we're focusing on one commodity, copper. And today we've also brought in a bona fide expert to provide a keynote address to set the scene on what is really happening in the copper market, the supply-demand thematics, and what to look for when evaluating investment opportunities in the sector. In addition, we've found three cracking copper companies to present today: Terra Metals, ASX code TM1, Cooper Metals, ASX code CPM, Sunshine Metals, ASX code SHN, and Renegade Exploration Limited, ASX code NRX. Remember, this webinar is interactive. We want you to ask questions of the presenters. So while they're presenting, think up some questions and submit them using the Q&A button on your screen. I'd now like to introduce our keynote presenter for today, Lowell Resources Funds Management Chief Investment Officer, John Forwood. John, over to you.
Good morning, David. Thank you very much for the invitation to present today and say a few make a few background comments on copper. If we could just move through the slides, that's the normal disclaimer. Just in terms of the fund, we're about 20% invested in base metals, and the lion's share of that is copper. So copper is important to us and makes up a substantial portion of the portfolio. Just moving on. Look, just a couple of quick slides on the market, and we're focused on the junior resources market. But this is data from Austex, the whole of the ASX resources market from the tiniest company through to BHP. Average share prices. You can see that 2023 was a terrible year. But the start since about February this year, we've seen a reasonable uptick in the average share prices on the ASX. So there is some light at the end of the tunnel. Just next slide, please. The junior sector versus the majors was really hit hard in 2023. This is a chart of all sectors from the US, the S&P 500, either the big boys versus the Russell 2000, either the smaller caps. And you can see that the move away from the small caps has been across most sectors. So it wasn't personal to the mining or resources sector. Next slide, please. And here's some data focused on the ASX. You can see that the larger caps have done very well over the last 24 months. On the left-hand side, the caps greater than 70 odd million, up 70% in the resources market. But the nano caps down 70% over the last 2 years, sorry. But in the last 3 months, there's been an improvement in the more junior sector, and you can see that the sort of the mid-range there, sort of sub 60 odd million, has improved 13% over the last 3 months. So hopefully we are seeing a bit of a trickle-down effect into the much more junior end of the market. Next slide, please. Just to set the scene here, moving on to copper itself. Here's the very long-term copper price going back 70 odd years. You can see, if you cast your mind back 25 years to around the year 2000, you would have been very confident that the copper price wasn't going over $50 a pound anytime soon. But by the mid-2000s, we saw the copper price go on an absolute tear during the 2000s mining and commodity boom, and it hit $4.50 a pound in 2011. So and that's where we are back to today. So it's a very exciting time to be talking about copper. Next slide, please. This is the copper price over the last 30 odd years, plotted against the ASX Junior Resources Index. And it's interesting to note that back in the 2000s mining boom, the copper price and the junior resources sector moved largely in sync. But that coincidence has completely broken down in the last decade or so. And perhaps some of the reasons for that are back in the 2000s, there was capital available to develop projects. Companies, junior companies could have some level of optimism that they were be able to take their project through to production. Whereas today, partly because some of the majors committed some pretty bad capital investment decisions back in the 2000s, there's not nearly as much development capital available today. So moving your project from pre-development through to production is a lot tougher. I think also we've seen a reduction in the number of copper players on the ASX, with things like Oz Minerals getting taken over, Demetallica, etc. So there's just not the opportunity to invest in copper as much as there might have been back 20 odd years ago. Next slide, please. Just look very quickly, looking at the price performance over the last 12 months of the big boys. You can see Freeport-McMoran has done really well over the last 12 months. First Quantum has been very much in the news due to the suspension and looks like long-term hiatus in production from its Cobre Panama mine, which produces up to 4 or 5% of the world's copper, and that has had an impact on copper supplies and copper price, particularly copper concentrate supplies. Next slide. And then turning to Aussie producers, you can see the last 12 months somewhat going sideways, but certainly the last 2 or 3 months we've seen a real positive uptick in those share prices. Next slide, please. And then some of the pre-production companies had generally a tough 2023, but the last couple of months since February have been remarkably good for a number of these pre-development copper companies. Moving on. Now, this slide is probably my favorite one, and I think it's really important. Basically, it's showing world global copper consumption going back to 1900. I think this slide actually was something that Robert Friedland put up. But in summary, you can see that global copper consumption doubles roughly every 25 years. And we're sitting around 27 million tonnes at the moment. 2023 take us through to 2050. On that basis, you are well over 50 million tonnes of copper consumption by 2050, which is a really big amount. And everybody wants copper. So the big boys, BHP's had its second bid for Anglo, rebuffed. We heard that overnight. And the real driver for that bid is trying to get its hands on Anglo's 700,000 odd tonnes per annum of copper production. Mark Bristow at Barrick, big gold miner, has come out and said he really likes copper, and we're not going to have enough copper. And Rio hasn't ruled out making a play for Anglo either for its copper. So copper is very popular, and there's a number of really good fundamental drivers as to why in the long term copper looks very, very positive. Next slide, please. And one of those drivers is a big driver is electrification, and a growing source of demand for electrification is artificial intelligence and data centers. And this is just a slide showing the US demand for power from things like electric vehicles and data centers. And I think Canaccord came out recently and estimated that up to another 6 million tonnes of copper cumulatively could be required for data centers just through to 2030. So that's a massive amount if you're thinking that current global consumption is 27 million tonnes a year. Next slide, please. The Goldman Sachs also forecasting deficits, and it's just increased its forecast deficit for 2026. So that's they're forecasting a 700,000 tonne per annum deficit by 2026. Yeah, look, and the amount of metal required for producing power has doubled, up by 50% in the last 15 years. So every kilowatt of power has a much greater metal intensity, and the major metal that goes into that is, of course, copper. Next one. Yeah, so here's an estimate. There's been, across the resources sector, there's been underinvestment from oil and gas right through to base metals, and copper is one of the standouts in terms of the underinvestment that has occurred, and that's just built up a big requirement for additional investment to try and meet the forecast supply gap over the next 7 or 8 years. This CRU group chart shows that we need another 150 billion invested in copper mining to try and fill that gap. Next slide, please. So turning to the OPEC of copper, Chile, the country, it produces nearly 20% of the world's copper consumption, 5 million tons per annum. Far away, above and away ahead of the next largest producer, which is Peru, at 2.6 million tons per annum. But looking sort of a bit more granularly at how Chile's been going in trying to ramp up its production. So 2023 was its lowest production for 15 years. 2024 is forecast by the state copper company to increase its copper production somewhat, but it's already had to downgrade that increased forecast, and we're not even halfway through the year. They are forecasting a greater, another step up next year, but it's not easy. I think PricewaterhouseCoopers came out with a report in the last couple of weeks saying that 50% of the world's copper production by 2050 will be in heavily drought affected areas, and you can't mine copper without, or can't process copper without water. So there's a real threat to existing copper production, let alone new copper production. Next slide, please. Just turning to recycling, is that going to fill the gap? If we need another 8 million tons a year by 2032, is recycling going to be able to step in there? Well, as the copper price goes up, and it has been going up, you will see increased recycling. You'll also see increased, theft of copper from power lines and railways and things. But at 5 odd million tons a year of recycling out of possibly a requirement of up to 50 million tons by 2050, you can see recycling sort of flat line through to 2021 for 5 or 6 years. So it does look pretty unlikely that recycling will be able to fill that gap. Next slide, please. So what's happening at the moment? Copper processing fees, TCRCs, as many people might have heard, have turned negative in China. That's probably got a couple of causes. One is the extra smelting capacity that the Chinese have been building, but the other is the lack of supply of copper concentrate. Things like Cobre Panama going offline take a big chunk of concentrate out of the market. So from a concentrate point of view, things are very tight. Next slide, please. One of the anomalies, though, in the current market is that we've seen the copper price jump, but we've also seen copper inventories, visible copper inventories in warehouses jump as well. So you can see that Shanghai Futures Exchange warehouse stocks are at a 4-year high. That's a seasonal high. Generally around this time of year, you do see inventories peak, but it is a bit of a head scratcher why you're seeing higher inventories at the same time as the copper price is going higher. Next slide, please. This represents that just again, you can see the brighter green is the Shanghai Futures Exchange. So China, the inventories are growing and they're exporting more copper. So it does indicate that the Chinese market, which is about 50% of consumption, is comfortably supplied at the moment. Next slide, please. Another indicator of that is the contango. So the copper contango, which is the spot versus 3-month spread, it's the widest it's been, I think, going back to LME records in 1994. So that also indicates that there's adequate supply at the moment for spot, but it gets a little bit tighter as you go forward. Next slide, please. The other thing that's I've noticed is the coincidence of metals bouncing since February. You can see this is tin and zinc and copper all have almost synchronously jumped since around February. Next slide, please. And similarly with gold. So look, I think one of the reasons for this is we saw a report from Bloomberg a couple of weeks ago saying that 3 of the big oil traders, including Vitol and Gunvor, are back in the metals market. They left the metals markets some time ago, but they're back in. So I think we're seeing some traders pushing the price up, and there is some speculation in the price at the moment for copper. Next slide, please. I mentioned earlier that China is takes the lion's share of copper consumption at the moment, and I'm sure everyone's heard about the Chinese property crash. But there's been a transition in terms of copper demand in China moving from the real estate sector through to the energy transition sector, and that's includes EVs, EV chargers, and wind turbines and power lines and all sorts of things. So that demand has really been taken up and is increasing, forecast to increase as a result of the energy transition. Next slide, please. So look, things look very positive for copper, particularly in the long term. Just a cautionary note, what can go wrong? So obviously China, the demand can fall there. The economy can, go into recession, if you like. But it's interesting to see what happened with nickel. Like a few years ago, Elon Musk was begging miners to produce more nickel. We didn't know where his nickel was going to come from building his Teslas. And you go back 10 years, and you were seeing people, this chart calling for a shortage of nickel by 2016. But next slide, please. If you go to today, you can see that the forecast shortage of nickel is not until 2030, and the reasons for that are partly thrifting by the EV makers, but largely because the Chinese have come up with a new processing technology to produce battery grade nickel, and Indonesia's, as a result, moved from a relatively small player in the nickel market to being 50% of the supply. So could that happen in copper? Well, copper is a much bigger market, but there are technologies being worked on, particularly in processing more difficult ores. I know, Rio Tinto working on their Newton sulfide leach technology in the Americas. That could be somewhat of a game changer for supplying additional copper. But the market is much bigger. The copper market is much bigger than nickel, about 10 times the size. And there's a bigger shortfall forecast as well. So that might be part of the answer, but it's certainly not the only answer. Next slide, please. And then just another metal that is interesting, just in terms of many people calling for higher metal prices over a very, very long term, and that was uranium. We saw probably 10 to 15 years of forecast every year, analysts forecasting higher prices, and it didn't happen. Uranium went down and down and down. but eventually, you know, dreams can come true. And, you know, last year we saw the uranium price spike to over $100 a pound. So it can take a long time for metals to, you know, realize the forecast, but it certainly can happen, and can happen very quickly. Next slide, please. Finally, just a plug for our little fund. We do, you know, this is to give investors some heart that you can make really good returns in the junior resources by investing in companies like the ones that we're about to hear from. So that's it from me. Thank you, David.
Thanks, John. Do have time for a quick question, and it probably flows on a little bit from the slide you've just presented. Where does the fund see the best value in copper equities at the moment?
Yeah, look, I think you know, we are naturally focused on the pre-development companies, and I think from some of my slides I've shown earlier, you have seen some of the, you know, the majors and the bigger producers run and have better share price performance than the real juniors. So we expect that there should be and could be a trickle-down effect. And it's the juniors that have hopefully going to catch up and go past the big companies, and certainly that's where you get the leverage. So that's where we that's where our portfolio is focused.
Thanks, John. A great presentation, and clearly set the scene for the presentations to come. Thanks for your time and your insights.
It's a pleasure.
Now I'd like to introduce the first of our company presenters, Thomas Lyons, CEO and MD of Terra Metals. Terra is a diversified critical minerals explorer focused on exploring and developing its high-quality West Australian projects. Thanks, Thomas. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, David, and thanks, John, for all those excellent insights into the copper market. It's a great segue into Terra Metals and our Dante project. So we're a copper-focused exploration company. We're drilling for copper right now. We're drilling an expansive 10,000 meter RC drilling program. As you can probably tell by the high-vis shirt and the background here, I am on site at the moment. So I'm up here at the Dante project. We've got quite a big team on site at the moment. We're drilling right now, and we've got about 2,000 meters of drilling left to go. We've put out about 7,000 meters of that drilling at the lab at the moment. We've just received our first lot of assays back, and that is the first week of drilling those samples from we've been drilling for 2 months, so we've received the assays back from the first week of drilling, and over 90% of the assays are left to come back from that drilling. And we've hit magmatic copper sulfides and precious metal system immediately on the first hole. So we're really excited by what that means, and I'm here to share a little bit more about the scale of the opportunity that we're seeing here on the ground and what everyone's got to look forward to. Next slide, please. So as I said, we're in the West Musgraves. We are drilling for copper. We're about 15 k's from Nebo Babel, and I might just skip to the next slide, please. So I'll talk more about the region in a minute, but here's a snapshot of the company for people who don't know us very well. We've got almost 300 million shares on issue. We've got a market cap of around $15 million. Now, our largest shareholder is the Tribeca Natural Resources Fund, so it's quite rare for a junior company to have an institutional shareholder with such a large portion of the company at this stage. So we're very happy with that. We've got, you know, a large amount of our top 20 and top 10 shareholders own a huge portion of the company. We've got almost 10% across directors and management of the company, so it's tightly held. Everyone in this company is very incentivized to see the projects deliver discoveries and resources. So that's what we're focused on, and that's why we're out here. Next slide, please. So we've got an excellent board. I mentioned Tribeca Natural Resources Fund is our largest shareholder. We have Ben Cleary on the board, who's part of Tribeca. Also Hayden Smith, who's formerly Tribeca. Ian Middlemas is our chairman, who is quite well known for being the chairman of multiple ASX listed companies, formerly an executive with Normandy. And we have an excellent technical team. We have Scott Halley, who's our chief geochemist. He's very well known in the industry for being, you know, a really great geochemist and a creative thinker. He's agreed to come and work on this project with us, specifically for Dante project, because, you know, he's excited by what he's seeing here. And we've got Wolfgang Mayer, who's a specialist consultant and expert in layered mafic, ultramafic intrusive systems, which is what we're drilling into at the moment. Next slide, please. So here's the Dante project. Next slide. We are located, as I said, in the West Musgrave region. We're about 10, 15 kilometers from Nebo Babel. So Nebo Babel is a 400 million ton magmatic nickel, copper, and platinum group element in sulfide deposit just down the road from us. It's in development at the moment. BHP are building it. It's a $1.7 billion mine build. We've also got the Sakuth magmatic copper deposit just near us. It's also got some palladium, gold, and some nickel in it. It's about 160 million tons. And then we have the Manchego deposit just off to the northeast of west of us. So you can see that we're the blue there, Dante project, we're landlocked by BHP. So not many juniors can say that. It's obvious that it's a highly prospective region. It's the land of giants. We're surrounded by major deposits, and that's exactly what we're drilling for in our project. We've got tens of kilometers of outcropping high-grade mineralization, which has never had systematic exploration conducted. We're drilling it right now, and we're hitting copper immediately. So we're very excited by what we're doing right now. Next slide, please. So this is just some research that was published by the WA School of Mines in collaboration with the Centre for Exploration Targeting and the Geological Survey of West Australia. And what they did was plugged in all of the elements that they believe produce these big nickel and copper sulfide deposits, gold deposits, and they spat out a prospectivity ranking over the entire West Musgrave region. They also mapped the major fault, which is thought to be highly responsible for most of the large deposits here as the plumbing system. And what you can see is that Lachlan-Mundrobilla fault runs directly through the Dante project, through the center, and the Dante project has ranked out of that research as the highest ranked in the West Musgraves for copper and nickel, and also the highest ranked prospectivity for platinum, palladium, and gold. Next slide, please. So this is our focus area right now. The project is much larger than this, but we are focusing on the low-hanging fruit and the things that are sticking out of the ground. Our 4 key prospects at the moment are the Cronus intrusion, which is a large magmatic mineralized copper, gold, palladium in sulfide intrusion. It's had some historical drilling. We've just undertaken some drill holes ourselves. We've completed 15 holes. 5 of those are back. All of those holes hit copper and palladium and gold mineralization essentially all the way through every single hole. So we've proven there immediately, proven concept there that it's a big mineralized system. And now our work is to go, the purpose of that shallow RC drilling is to inform the deeper diamond drilling to get down to the point where we believe the higher grade economic mineralization is likely to be. So we're excited to get that EIS funded drilling happening soon. We've just been awarded $220,000 from the West Australian government to drill those holes, which is excellent. It means they see the opportunity here as well. And it's great to have that validation from the Geological Survey of West Australia, now backed up by our own drilling. We've also got the Creus Reef. So we've got 3 reefs on the project. They outcrop in this area for 23 kilometers. We believe strongly, if you look at all those magnetic lines around those reefs, we believe that there are multiple other reefs under a little bit of cover. So that's some exploration upside for us, but we don't really need exploration upside right now. 23 kilometers is a strike length of outcropping mineralization that most human beings can't even fathom. And until you come out here and walk it or fly over it in a helicopter, it's hard to understand. But we've just drilled 3 kilometers of Creus, and we've just released the first couple of holes from one drill fence, and we've hit magmatic copper sulfides, platinum, palladium, with a high-grade vanadium titanium byproduct in a stratiform mineralization immediately. So that is an excellent result for the very beginning. 90% of the assays are left to come, as I said, so we're pretty excited to see the rest of those come through. We've also got 2 other reefs. We've drilled the Hyperion Reef after Creus. So 7 kilometers of that reef has been drilled now, 20 holes. All of the holes from Hyperion are out at the lab at the moment and a pending assay. And we're looking forward to getting those back. We've hit the prospective reef on every single drill fence we've drilled so far over 10 kilometers. And very soon, we're about to take the rig from Cronus today or tomorrow down to the Oceanus Reef and drill our 3rd reef. So yes, there is more. The Oceanus Reef is 5 or 6 kilometers long in itself. And collectively, it is an absolutely huge strike. Next slide, please. So here's Creus. So we've just put the initial results out yesterday for the first 3 holes. As you can see, there are 10 more holes to come back there, covering 3 kilometers of strike. As I said, we've hit the reef on every single drill fence that we've drilled out there. And we've seen evidence for multiple reefs. So not just one reef. Mostly, often in these systems, you only get one, but we're seeing multiple. And what's exciting about this is it has a lot of similarities to a few different deposits globally. I mean, if you look at the Nebo-Babel resource to the south of us, the magmatic copper, nickel, PGE deposit that BHP are building right now, the copper grade in sulfide there is about 0.33%. And the precious metals are less than 0.1 gram per ton. We're already seeing higher grades than that in our first couple of holes in this stratiform deposit, which sticks out of the ground. And as I said, the beauty of stratiform deposits is they keep going and going and going. That's why, they tend to produce large tonnages. So, but on top of that, we're seeing more than one reef. So once you duplicate these reefs and you stack them on top of each other, well, that obviously increases the scale of the opportunity significantly. So immediately we're hitting, as I said there, good grade of copper. We're getting precious metals. We're seeing copper up to 0.9, almost 1%, which is pretty excellent for the first reconnaissance drill fence drilled. But as I said, since then, we continue to see that along strike. So we're looking forward to putting the rest of those results out. There's assays outstanding for another 5,000 meters of drilling along the reefs, covering 10 kilometers. Next slide, please. So this again is the Dante Reef. So this is just zooming out now to show the Creus and Hyperion reefs. You can see there the drilling that's been undertaken at Hyperion. As I said, 3 kilometers at Creus plus 7 kilometers at Hyperion. All of those assays left outstanding now. We've hit the prospective reef on all of the drill fences that we've drilled so far. And we expect to receive assays now every couple of weeks for the next couple of months. And the Oceanus Reef is still to come. Next slide, please. So this is Cronus. We're really excited here out at Cronus. We've been able to achieve what we'd really hoped to do with the first couple of holes in the shallow RC drilling. So we're drilling the shallow portions of this out. There's been 5 historical drill holes drilled across this. All of them hit hundreds of meters of disseminated copper sulfides and gold and palladium mineralization. And we've put our first shallow fence across the intrusion and proven that mineralization does extend along strike. So the entire intrusion appears to be mineralized. So what we say about this and what our consulting geochemists say about this intrusion is that it has a massive copper budget. It also has a massive gold budget. So when you get a 7-kilometer long magmatic intrusion that appears the entire thing has had metal enrichment in sulfide, there's an extremely high likelihood that there's an area, a zone, a transition point in the evolution of that intrusion where you're going to get high-grade magmatic sulfide mineralization. And the purpose of our shallow RC drilling here is to collect the evidence and determine the vectors so we know where to put that diamond drill hole to get down to that point. And so we've got the right team on this interpreting the data to take a look at that. And that's what we'll be using our EIS-funded diamond drilling funds for a little bit later this year. So you can see some of the intercepts there, over 130 meters of low-grade copper and 60, 70 meters of gold. But there might be a couple of meters break. If you put them all together, we're talking mineralized from the top to bottom of hole. So essentially from 0 meters all the way down. So there's no point in this intrusion that we've seen that's not mineralized yet, which is an excellent sign for an extremely fertile system. Next slide, please. So it's not just what's sticking out of the ground and what we're focusing on right now. Dante Project is a pipeline of targets that will continue to yield excellent drill targets over years and years to come. So we're naturally, as a junior company, drilling the things which are sticking out of the ground right now. But you can see from the EM targets there that we have a huge pipeline of targets, and we're going to be progressing these and developing the priority ones of these to drilling in the near future. Next slide, please. So I'll just kind of finish up here, and we can look at the rest of it another time. But we're doing really good things on the ground here. We live in the community. We have the town on the tenement. We've got an airstrip here, and we are working with the community every day. We're employing people, and we're having really good engagement. So we're providing educational sporting equipment, and that relationship is with the Ngundarra people we value greatly, and we're very thankful for the Ngundarra people and the council for that relationship, which we continue to nurture and value. And thank you very much.
Thanks, Thomas. Great presentation. Couple of really good questions here. First, you did mention Tribeca's Natural Resources Fund being on the register with a 15% or so interest. What was the I suppose the attraction, but what was the reasoning, or when did they join the register, and what do they bring, and what are they focused on?
Yeah, so Tribeca have been with the former company for some time from a previous life. But certainly the company, we just changed the name recently from GCX to Terra Metals. And the company was really looking for a core asset that had the potential to deliver, great copper exposure of a large scale, and to be able to, go through the process of value creation from discovery to resource development in the copper space. So, this is the asset, the Dante asset, that was chosen to come in to that company. And that's where the focus is now. Obviously, Tribeca have participated in the recent capital raise. They continue to be supportive of the stock and of the project, of Dante project. And as I said, we have two of the Tribeca people on the board, including Ben Cleary, there, providing advice and support. Now, what do they bring? They bring a huge range of, advisory, networking, and also, capital exposure opportunities for the company, which is uncommon for a junior company of our size. So it provides a great advantage for us, and also some real power there upon, to really ramp things up and develop things upon discovery.
You also mentioned BHP just down the road, and sometimes that can be hard because they're doing a lot of great things, but they just don't tell the market. And you might see it, but can't tell much more than that. Are you constantly looking over the fence to see what they're up to? Because clearly you're hoping for some analogy between what they're doing and what you're hoping to find. And then I suppose in reverse, the question here is, how closely do you think they are watching what you're doing based on the land holding you have and their clear focus on copper?
Well, I know how closely they're watching us, and it is close. We're their neighbour and we're drilling. So they're watching us very closely, and we obviously they're our neighbours, so we talk with them very often. And that's a relationship that we like to look after our neighbours, and we like to communicate with our neighbours regularly and see where we can share synergies and resources where possible, being out in this region. So do we look over the fence? Well, we don't need to, because they fly into our tenement. The airstrip's on our ground, so we see them every day as they land on our airstrip and drive down to Nebo Babel. We do go down to Nebo Babel from time to time to the mine site and every now and again. It's very, very close. So yes, out here we're all fairly close, I would say, and they're our nearest neighbour, and we're landlocked by them.
I always like when the questions come through that are well thought out and clearly people who know what they're talking about. We've got a question here, which we'll just use as the last question. Will you wait for high penetrating AEM surveys before drilling the deeper diamond holes at Cronus?
We're still working out whether it's going to be necessary, because we have geochemical and mineralogical evidence that can be a very, very powerful targeting tool on its own. And it may be the case that airborne EM is not the tool that is suitable for identifying all mineralization styles. It can pick up massive sulfide mineralization, but Nebo Babel down the road is it's a 400 million ton disseminated sulfide body. So you can sometimes see them with airborne EM, not always, and you don't have to rely upon it, but it's an excellent tool, an extra layer of data to provide further confidence in certain targets, but not all. So if from the drilling we see the evidence geochemically and mineralogically, which is like we read the code and it tells us immediately, we know where we are and where we need to put the hole, then waiting for airborne EM is simply not necessary. Hence why we're doing reconnaissance geochemical drilling right now.
Great answer, great company, quality team, and clearly well backed. Exciting times ahead. We look forward to watching Terra Metals and its news flow with interest. Thomas, thanks for your time.
Thanks a lot, David.
Now I'd like to introduce Ian Walland, Managing Director at Cooper Metals. Cooper is a relatively new Australian-based mineral exploration company focused on the discovery of copper and gold across its portfolio of assets in Queensland and Western Australia. Ian, over to you.
Thank you, David, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. So Cooper Metals is a young company. We're only 2.5 years old, and we're focused on copper and gold exploration. Our flagship project is in the Mount Isa region. Next slide, please. Next slide. So we have about 80 million shares on issue, a market cap of around $10 million. Importantly, we've got $4.4 million in the bank at the end of last quarter, and we're well supported by the Lowell Fund and Allow Resources Fund as well, which have around 13% collectively of our shares on issue. The board are well incentivized with around 7% of the shareholding. We have 3 projects, 2 in Queensland in the Mount Isa Inlier and 1 in WA, all focused on copper gold exploration. Next slide. So we've already heard quite a lot from John about the how copper is critical for clean energy and how the price has been going up at a rapid rate of knots in the last 12 months or so. So I just draw your attention to also that there's been quite a lot of M&A activity, not only BHP's recent attempt at Anglo, but also locally in the Mount Isa area, where we've had Harmony Gold buy out Copper Mountain for about $230 million for the Eva deposit. And more recently, we've just had Carnaby do a deal with Hammer Metals for about $20 million on the Mount Hope project. And we're seeing increased JV activity as well. You've got Evolution Mining, which have the Ernest Henry mine. They've recently done an $8 million JV deal with a junior explorer near Cloncurry. Next slide. So there's 4 main key things I want to talk about initially with the Mount Isa East Copper Gold project. You can see the map there that we have quite a large tenement holding. You've got Mount Isa just there on the left-hand side, and all our tenements are within about 50 to 100 kilometres of Mount Isa there. And we have 1,600 square kilometres of tenure. I've highlighted the Carnaby Resources tenements there in yellow, just down to the south there, where they've announced over 20 million tonnes of ore in several deposits that have recently been discovered. So that shows you that the area is very highly prospective for copper gold mineralisation. It's a very strong mining district. There's a lot of infrastructure there. You've got Mount Isa mines, of course. You've got Ernest Henry. You've got Eloise. You've got Mount Colin. So there's a lot of mining going on, and there's been mining there for over 100 years in the Mount Isa region. We believe that there's very strong exploration growth potential on our ground. We've identified in the last 2.5 years around 50 targets through a mixture of geophysical and geochemical prospecting. Next slide. Now, late last year, we did some drilling around our Brumby Ridge copper gold prospect, and we hit the spectacular 71 metres at 2.8% copper. Now, we followed that up earlier this year with some diamond and RC drilling. Now, the assay results are still pending for that, but we found that there was a well-mineralised parallel vein system there shown in pink. This is a plan here that you can see on the right-hand side. And there's these cross-cutting veins as well that are more in an east-westerly direction. So it's quite a complex vein system. The large intercepts that we got around 71 metres were in these cross-cutting veins, which are quite narrow. But what it does show is that it's a very fertile IOCG system in that area. So next slide. Next slide, you can see a section here through the Brumby Ridge copper gold prospect. And there's 2 main parallel veins shown in red, and there's that cross-cutting vein that you can see in white there. Now, there could be multiple of these cross-cutting veins. Their spatial extent is uncertain at this point, but I believe that it is evidence of a strong IOCG fertile system along the Brumby Ridge fault, and that Brumby Ridge fault does go for at least 25 kilometres. Next slide. Here's a geological map on the right. You can see the Brumby Ridge fault that I'm talking about running up through the centre of that map in a north-northwesterly direction. And there's quite a few copper gold prospects along that fault. And we're continuing to do prospecting along that fault, initially with our portable XRF, which is quite a rapid way to check for copper mineralisation and generate anomalies. And if those copper anomalies look good, then we move on to EM or IP on the ground to get those drill ready. So that work is ongoing at the moment. I've got a team in the field at the moment continuing that geochemistry through the area. And recently we've just drilled 4 prospects. We've done about 2,000 metres of RC. The assays are pending for that, and we should get those results later in the month. Next slide. Now, just talking about one of those prospects that we recently drilled, Mafic Sweat South. You can see that there's a geochemistry anomaly shown there in the plan. Now, that copper anomaly is about 500 metres long, 100 metres wide, and it's got a coincident VTEM anomaly. So VTEM is airborne EM. There's a shallow EM anomaly there. We did some initial drilling in 2023, and we got up to 65 meters at 0.34% copper in the oxide zone, and that hole finished in mineralization. So now we've done 3 more RC holes through that area, and we're testing deeper down, looking for a sulfide system and also trying to extend that mineralization footprint. So assays will be out for that later this month. Next slide. Similarly, Matrix West North, which is only about 700 meters along strike, has a coincident geochem and VTEM anomaly as well. Now, the geochem anomaly here is a lot longer. It's about 800 meters long. And we've just recently tested that with 4 RC holes for about 400 meters under some old workings, also into the VTEM anomaly and into the best part of the geochem anomaly. Next slide. Now, the Raven prospect is an interesting prospect. All these prospects are within 10 kilometers of each other, so it's like a cluster of copper gold prospects. I've got a geochemical plan that you can see here on the right of the copper anomalism. That's all portable XRF anomalism. We did some drilling into the Raven prospect late last year, and we got some economic intercepts, which were really encouraging, around 10 meters at 1.3% copper and about 0.17 grams per ton gold. Now, Raven was discovered from a VTEM anomaly, so it was an airborne EM anomaly. There was no old workings here or anything. Raven has a little bit of pyrrhotite in it, which gives quite a good EM response. We did a downhole EM survey late last year, and that indicated that there was an off-hole conductor heading towards the southeast. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see here there's a long section. So the area that we drilled is shown in the red polygon there. We drilled that late last year in 2023. We hit the economic intercepts. The downhole EM showed an off-hole conductor, which is shown there in a pink polygon. And that's what we've just drilled in the last month. We've done 4 RC holes there for 600 meters, and those assays will be due out later this month. Next slide. Our Barbara East tenement, that's in the northern part of our tenement package, and it's near the Barbara deposit. Now, the Barbara deposit had around 5 million tons of copper gold ore in it at about 1.6% copper and some gold as well. Now, the Barbara deposit has an EM response, so it has a VTEM anomaly associated with it. So we got some government funding for a VTEM survey there in 2023, and significantly that generated 10 anomalies that look really good. 3 of those anomalies are particularly good and have been modelled up by our geophysicist. Those 3 anomalies show that the anomalies start below surface, about 25 to 50 meters below surface. And we've been on the ground there. We found some weak copper gold anomalies associated with those anomalies, and we'll be drilling those later this year as well. So that's a really exciting prospect. There's never been any VTEM done over this area before our survey. Next slide. So over the 2.5 years, we've generated around 50 targets. We're systematically working our way through our tenure. We're using a mixture of geophysics and geochemistry. Just last year, we did over 7,000 soil samples. We've done over 2,000 line kilometers of VTEM. So we've had a very active 2.5 years, and that's paying dividends now, generating a pipeline of targets for us to systematically test. And we have a big year in 2024 testing these targets. Next slide. Just shifting to our Orindi project now, it's closer to Cloncurry. So it's near the Eloise mine, which has about 20 million tons of mined and remaining resources in it of copper gold. It's a very fertile area. We're looking for iron oxide copper gold and iron sulfide copper gold deposits. Next slide. Now, this shows a magnetic map on the left and a geology map on the right of the same area. You can see our tenements there shown in white, and we're really focusing on that prospective zone that you've got as a red outline. Now, that red outline shows a number of occurrences along there, the Jericho deposit, Eloise, etc. And Jericho itself was discovered by EM. So the next step here is an EM survey that we'll be doing later this year. And if we get a good EM anomaly, we'll be drill testing that one as well. Next slide. Just quickly on our Guru project in WA, it's not far from Silver Lake's Deflector mine. We've got 2 tenements there. In the last couple of years, we've been doing several phases of geochem surveys, and we've generated 5 gold anomalies. Next slide. Now, those 5 anomalies with the best result is a rock chip up to 2.56 grams per tonne gold. And all these anomalies are on a greenstone belt, which has had hardly any drilling in it. Quite a bit of these greenstone belt is undercover, so it hasn't had a lot of attention in the past. Now, we're just going through the regulatory processes at the moment. I've got a team right there at the moment doing some follow-up geochem and meeting the regulators on site, so we hope to be drilling there later this year as well. Next slide. We take our environmental and social and governance obligations very, very seriously. We have a good relationship with the local community, our stakeholders, including the Indigenous and the landholders in the region. Next slide. So just the key takeaways there. The copper price is up. Well, it's greater than this slide's about a week old, so I think it's great. It's more than 20% up in the last 12 months. So it's a great time to be in copper, of course. I see significant share price growth potential at Cooper Metals with over 50 targets for us to test just in Mount Isa area alone. We've got a busy exploration program for 2024. We've already done 4,000 metres of drilling this year up there. We'll be doing a lot of follow-up drilling through the year and commencing exploration in our Arindi project near Cloncurry. We're well funded with over $4.4 million in the bank at the end of last quarter. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Great presentation. And as you say, copper price doing all the right things, and the project clearly rapidly advancing in the 2 years since you came to the ASX. Couple of very, very insightful questions from people who obviously know the business well. ESG and land access is becoming more important within the mining industry to maintain your license to operate, as you touched on a few slides ago. Could you provide some detail on what Cooper Metals is doing to manage access risk?
Sure. Look, I agree that ESG is becoming increasingly important, especially as our stakeholders become more informed. And there's a lot more competing land uses in the area, like wind farms, etc., and cattle farms, of course. There's a global trend here. We've heard from John about the recent mine that was shut down in Panama on environmental grounds. So, that's quite concerning. So we take that seriously. And I've seen juniors before lose their ability to do drilling as they breach their conditions or environmental conditions. So I've had a lot of experience personally discovering and developing deposits in highly regulated areas, regional reserves in South Australia. Queensland has a very well-mapped pathway for explorers and miners. So as long as you stick to that pathway and follow the process, I think you can, there's no problem there. Also, we think communication is very important. We do have robust agreements with all our landowners and the Indigenous groups as well. So we work to those agreements, and we've been finding that actually Queensland is a great place to explore because the environmental regulations and also the Indigenous approval process works quite well with the explorers, because it is an area that has a rich mining heritage. And I think that the stakeholders are all quite used to working with miners and explorers in the area.
And what about funding? Obviously, junior greenfields explorers, there is a challenge to make sure you've got the funds, which is seeing across the board a reduction in ground activity in the sector. How's Cooper placed for funding, and what do you need to do to meet the funding challenge?
Yeah, we're currently placed very well, and I think we saw from John's presentation that a lot of the micro caps were quite unloved in 2023. I will point out again that we did have a $4.4 million in the bank at the end of the last quarter, so we're well funded. Queensland, again, is a great place to explore because they're very serious about their critical minerals. So we've recently got what they call a tenement rent holiday, which puts another $100,000 per annum that we would be paying on tenement rent. That is going into the ground instead. And at the end of this year, we will have received around $300,000 from the government in grants for geophysical surveys like VTEM and a gravity survey that we're about to commence shortly. The other two board members in Cooper Metals have a long experience in capital markets and raising funds. We're very well supported by the Lowell Resources Fund in Lowell, which has supported us through recent capital raises. So I think going forward, Cooper Metals is in really good shape to progress our exploration in the area.
Thanks, Ian. Well, Cooper Metals clearly advancing its copper assets in a systematic but efficient manner. We will look forward to following with interest. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, David.
I'd now like to introduce Sunshine Metals Managing Director Damien Keys, who will present on the work he and the wider team are putting in towards the discovery and development at its high-quality Queensland projects comprising Ravenswood Consolidated, Triumph, Investigator and Hodgkinson. Damien, over to you.
Thanks, David. And being a Queensland-focused, Queensland-based company, I'd like to reiterate Ian's comments that Queensland is a fantastic place to do business. We're chasing big system gold and copper targets at the moment, and I'll take you through that now. Next slide. Standard disclaimer. Just a quick overview, trading at around 1.8 cents for a market cap of around that $25 to $28 million mark. Had $4 million cash in bank. As of Thursday last week, shareholders approved another $600,000 as part of a placement that was just completed. So 4.6-ish, less a little bit of drilling that's been going on. Directors have invested a significant portion. And I guess we welcome to the register at that last raise, 1832 Asset Management out of North America, and Lion Selection have jumped on board for a bigger portion as well. Next slide, please. We're Queensland-based, Queensland-focused, chasing, and we do have a significant resource base as it stands. We've got a highly active team that can be on the ground at our flagship project at Ravenswood Consolidated within an hour and a half from our main office. Next slide, please. The board is comprised of 4 board members and myself. I'm a geo. We've got experience across the resources sector from project acquisition, exploration, development and operations. And we've got a more than adequate team to really see this fast track into the future. Next slide. Ravenswood Consolidated. So it is an hour and a half out the road from Townsville. We're based in Townsville. It's beautiful looking outside at the moment. Blue skies this time of year is perfect up here. Townsville is a great place to do business for a minerals explorer. We've got 3 laboratories in town, a concentrate export port, zinc copper refineries in town, a rail line that links directly out to Mount Isa that passes through the project area. The government have also invested significantly in the copper string power corridor, which will run through the project. And John touched on water being critical for copper processing. We've got the Burdekin Dam that sits just off the south edge of the project area. Water won't be an issue. Next slide, please. The Charters Towers Ravenswood district is prolific, and it's well known for its gold endowment. So mines like Charters Towers, Mount Lation, Ravenswood currently is Queensland's largest gold mine, and Pajingo to the south of our leaseholding, 4 million ounces. It did also host the Thalanga lead zinc copper mine and the Highway Reward copper gold mine. So these VMS systems that are base metal and gold rich, about 14 million tonnes worth of base metal material out of the Mount Windsor volcanics, and we control about 85% of the Mount Windsor volcanic belt. We also have a copper moly porphyry corridor that sits in the northeast of the land holding with advanced targets at Titov, where we've put down an exploration target in the top 100 metres. So really high-grade moly to go with that copper system. We'll move forward. We've got a solid resource base, so 5.5 million tonne at 12% recoverable zinc equivalent. And zinc equivalent's a horrible way to record things, but the focus of the Liontown drilling in the past has been on the lead zinc part of the system. We do have a gold and copper rich footwall zone to mineralisation, and these VMS resources in their own right already contain a significant amount of gold and copper. 190,000 ounces of contained gold and 53,000 contained tonnes of copper metal. Importantly, 63% of the Liontown resource is now in indicated status, which gives us a great platform to build off, and we know where we're heading next. Next slide. We picked up the greater Liontown component of the Ravenswood Consolidated project 12 months ago, 12 months ago, a week ago. And when we picked up the project, it came with 6,000 metres of diamond core. And in that 6,000 metres of diamond, we saw some spectacular gold and copper intersections. So it was 6,000 metres that hadn't been released to market. We've been through and processed that. We also generated a new geology model. So next, please. Generated a new geology model whereby we mapped out, in this case, the footwall loads. And we're looking at metal zonation. It's telling us about thermal gradients and where the hottest parts of the system are. We believe that's where the fluids have entered the system, and we can see the red is gold and the green is copper. We do have these nice copper and gold rich parts of the system. Next, please. We've completed 3 RC programs. Results from the first two RC programs have intersected extremely high-grade gold. We have seen some nice copper kicking in a few of those holes too, and we're currently awaiting assay results from the 3rd RC program that's been completed. And we've got a diamond rig that's still turning, and results for the first 3 holes are at the lab as well. And we're waiting those results. Next. We've completed a resource upgrade since we've had this ground. Importantly, there's a gap zone between the Liontown and Liontown East resources, with a handful of drill holes between, each of which contain economic intercepts. And we're sure that we'll be able to continue to grow that resource through that gap zone. And I guess the final point on this is that we've completed the first regional gold-focused exploration at Coronation, where we've mapped out barite veins, high rock chip gold contents in those barite veins. They were indicative. Gold and barite system was indicative of the Highway Reward mine site, which is about 2.5 kilometres to the south. So it has been a busy first 12 months. If we step forward, we'll go into how these systems form, and I'll just get you to play that video perfect. So these VMS systems are typically laid out on an ancient seafloor, Liontown in particular. Metalliferous sediment essentially is spewed out onto the seafloor. And we do see a thermal gradient. So a plumbing system beneath these VMS vents. Ultimately, what we're looking at is the hotter the fluid is, the more likely we are to precipitate out copper and gold. And by the time it cools to the point that it's precipitating out on the seafloor, we're starting to see metals like zinc, lead, and silver drop out on the seafloor. Our target, and the target in this system, is that footwall stratigraphy and that feeder stock. Next slide, please. Once this was laid out on the seafloor, we've tipped the whole system on its end, almost 90 degrees. So what we see is the deepest parts of the system are to the right of this image, to the north. So we see the sediment in blue, the volcanic basement in green, and we see The red shape is the seafloor lead zinc sulfide mineralisation, and the lesser drilled footwall is the gold copper rich part of the system. That's our target zone, as I just mentioned, not the initial target zone. The Carrington lode was first mined between 1905 and 1911, produced 28,000 ounces of gold at 22 grams a tonne. And then lead zinc was discovered in that predictable stratigraphic location and became the focus for exploration for the next 70 years. Next slide, please. We've had these stunning results in a nice tight little zone at the moment. It's currently 260 metres by 140 metres across. And we do grade from a gold-rich panel, so the red colour there, into a copper-dominant panel. It's not to say we don't see copper in the gold-rich zone, or we don't see gold in the copper-rich zone, but we do see a distinct change in mineralogy as we move. Next slide. That little snapshot, 260 by 140, is part of a system that is a mile long now. So this goes from the western end of the Carrington lode all the way out to the east at Liontown East, where 1.5 million tonnes of resource sits on the seafloor contact, and the footwall zone behind is really poorly drilled out. What we do see is that grade from booming gold numbers, the 20s at 18 and those sort of numbers, down into a copper-rich zone, which is typically where we've got the best parts, around that 5 metres at 5% copper. It gives us a fantastic target to chase at depth. We'll move on. We do have the highway reward style mineralisation. That is also going to be a really core focus for us moving forward throughout 2024. Highway reward was mined between 1987 and 2003, produced about 4 million tonnes at 5.5% copper and just over a gram gold. Some of the intersections, discovery intersections into highway reward are pretty eye-watering. So 48 at almost 12% copper and a gram and a half gold makes it a really attractive target in anyone's book. And these are slightly different VMS systems. They're essentially toothpaste style sulfide just wrapping up and around these rigid rhyolite bodies. Important to realise that conviction, part of the highway system, was discovered using IP. Next slide, please. We've just completed IP around the edge of the highway mining lease on a couple of prospects, Truncheon and Highway East. Now, the image on the left here is the gravity image. Gravity shows us about dense rock. You don't get much more dense rock than massive sulfide. So we see highway is coincident with a gravity high. The next largest responses in gravity sit at Truncheon and Highway East, and we've completed that IP survey. Now, the IP survey, ASX released out a couple of weeks back with those initial findings, but we've generated several targets out of this from the IP, many of which are coincident with these gravity anomalies. So we've got 3 advanced targets now, Truncheon, Highway East, and just to the north, Coronation, that we'll be doing further work on over 2024. And we think they're a great target style and can only hope that we get some of those highway style intersections. Next slide. So just to wrap up, we've got drilling ongoing, 17 out of the 18 holes drilled. The 18th hole is nearing target zone and progressing well. Those are at the lab. We expect results in coming weeks. We'll be drill testing those highway reward analog targets, Coronation, Truncheon, Highway East through 2024. We'll also be testing a series of large-scale gold-only targets. We're using and maybe abusing some of these geophysical techniques, well-known techniques, including EM, as discussed earlier, and we'll have a resource update out later in the year. That's about all from Sunshine. I'll leave you with those 4 points. So just chasing those big-scale targets, North Queensland-based technical team close to the project, really active, big news flow, and we look forward to a booming 2024. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Damien. Great presentation. A couple of really good questions here. Plenty of ground. How do you plan tackling it? How do you send the teams in the right directions at the right time?
Yeah, so it is definitely a dual focus. I guess when we picked up these projects, we've inherited a lot of really significant geochem and geophysical data. But yeah, it will be a split between that resource growth and that really exciting VMS system at Liontown that we're starting to understand, but also stepping further afield. And we think we can really shift the dial by some of these new targets and progressing that.
And what about funding? A big work program such as this requires a few dollars. What's funding look like, and how confident are you to fund the work that's required?
We have just completed the raise, so 4 million, 4.6 million in the bank, 4 million locked away at the last raise. We are looking to divest a couple of these other projects that are non-core now, and we see that adding to the till. We think we're in a great place to maintain the rage and be highly active on ground.
You did touch on, I think it was at Liontown, that the resource was listed in zinc equivalent. What does that mean in gold or copper terms?
Yeah, zinc is dominant metal, 330 odd thousand contained metal tons. Having said that, the footwall loads of Liontown are comprised of about 51, gold comprised about 51% of the metal value. So we are looking to dual report later this year. If we were to report in a gold equivalent, we've essentially got, it's around the 850,000 ounce mark at just under 5 grams recoverable, and further network, and I guess further resource drilling into that footwall to really bump up that number. But it's a nice significant resource base in anyone's book, and we think we're really pulling it apart and doing a nice job of it so far.
A question here, assumed from a shareholder: are you planning to consolidate the shares at any point? Is that something that's being considered by the board, or you just want to see what the workflow generates and how that appreciates the share price over the coming months and into the next year?
Yeah, no, it is a good question, and it's something that we do consider and review on a regular basis. What I would say is the liquidity's been fantastic. The last 6 months we've been a very liquid company, maintaining a solid share price, and at this point we don't see the need to alter that too far. But yeah, we keep those things on the table at all times as well. So.
Thanks, Damien. A great portfolio of assets, as you say, maintaining the rage, which will keep the news flow going, which shareholders love to see. We'll follow with interest. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Now I'd like to introduce our last presenter, Rob Kirkland, Chairman of Renegade Exploration, who's been generating heaps of news in recent days for all the right reasons, on the back of some exciting exploration results at its Mongoose West prospect within the Cloncurry project. Rob, over to you.
Thanks very much, David, and good afternoon or good morning to everybody who's taking the time to listen in. Next slide, please. There's our disclaimer. We've been operating in northwest Queensland for approximately 3 years now. We're in a joint venture with Glencore, and in one part of that, which we'll come to, we're actually earning back into the permit, which you see just up near Cloncurry. We're very excited about that particular target, but we've also got another one over in North Isa, and you can see it to the left, the top of the screen, the northwest there. We're going to be doing work at Tulloch this year, and maybe a little bit more at Lady Agnes, which we drilled a couple of years back. We're happy to be in the area. Just to endorse what Ian and Damo were just saying, it's a great area to work and play in. We're based in Cloncurry. It's a fab place to live, good people, excellent stakeholders. We've had no issues there. And to talk to Damo's point, and I don't want to one-up you on this one, Damo, but we can actually walk to work from our house to the Mongoose deposit and also that prospect that we're about to drill. Next slide, please. Corporately, we just raised some money, including the CEI grant that we picked up. We're sitting at just under $2 million in cash, and we do have some other assets that we've been working on selling, and we're in the room with a couple of parties on that. So we're well funded to go through this. We run this company very tight, effectively. The management team is myself and Ed Fry, the exploration manager. And over the journey, we've borrowed some money. That's going to get paid out. The loan facility has been paid down, and the lendor is actually going to participate in the recent placement by an upcoming general meeting, where they will convert 350 grand of their loan facility into shares. So a good positive note there. It's pretty tight. There's a few shares out nowadays, but it's a pretty tight structure. Next slide, please. So just coming to the players, Mark Connolly is pretty well known around the place, comes from a background of operations, which he tends to deny nowadays, but loves his exploration. But he's a good guy to have on board when it comes to talking turkey around numbers, when it comes to mining and processing and whatnot. Mark Wallace comes out of the markets, and a lot of people probably know him. Ed has a good solid background around exploration, and in particular in this area, which we found attractive when we were trying to get somebody to come on board about a year and a half ago full time, because up until then it was just me and some consultants. Ed and I fundamentally, as I said, are the ones working on the projects and getting our hands dirty and trying to run this thing as tight as a drum, but also get the results. Next slide, please. So the primary focus today is the Mongoose deposit and also the Mongoose Deeps prospect. You can see right there the town of Cloncurry. You can see that in the blue, that's the Carpentaria joint venture ground, which we're earning back into. We're up at around 30% now. We've actually pegged up through the town of Cloncurry, which we own 100%, mainly because all the work that we've done on Mongoose Deeps tells us that the bulk of that deposit sits within that area. Next slide, please. We did drilling last year, so we took over and started earning back into what we call EPM 8588 at the beginning of January. We'd done 2 programs by the end of July. We came out with a resource later in the year. And you can see where Mongoose is, where those drill holes are on the left of the Taipan deposit. It's actually a contiguous deposit to Taipan. So what we've announced there with that 3 million tonnes at just over 0.5% and a bit of gold, it does definitely grow in size when we amalgamate those two deposits. They're one and the same. So we are talking to True North. There's a fair bit of copper through there. And of course, they've got a fully permitted mining lease, and they're looking to bring oxide pads into production, which are just down in the bottom right-hand corner of their permit. So, so basically about a 2-kilometre hole from where Taipan and Mongoose are. Next slide, please. Here's just a slide with a few of the numbers that we got from that drill program, and you can see how interesting it is to us, because basically we drill every hole we drill there, we get copper. We had some lovely results on the way through, the 27 at 2.2, and then some bigger numbers, that 74 up around 0.7. All of this, and or a lot of it is from surface. So it's a very coppery area, and it's always been a bit of a mystery as to where it's come from. Next slide, please. We put this in, this is the Mongoose deposit and the optimised shell, and basically we're just looking at how much copper is running through that system. So this just gives you an idea of what's going on in that particular part of the ground that we control there. Next slide, please. Recently, we've done work at Mongoose West, so we've we think we're a good chance to extend the Mongoose deposit, heading down there to the west. Some very good grab samples. There's a fair bit of cover down there. What we found at Mongoose was that fundamentally a lot of it sticking out of the ground. There's a 200 to 300 metre long outcropping iron oxide copper gold, which we were going through and chipping and testing and all the rest of it. So what we found just over here was that there was a fair bit undercover, but we got some very nice signals from our recent ground magnetics. And we're planning possibly towards the end of the Mongoose Deeps hole to kick off up to 2,000 metre RC program over there, looking to extend that resource that starts at the Mongoose. Next slide, please. So talking about the Mongoose Deeps prospect, and you can see the magnetics there in that sort of pinky lavendery colour. It's a very large regional magnetic anomaly. We've done all of the work based on open source material. Sitting above this mag high is copper, as I mentioned before, and you can see we just plot up Mongoose again. Taipan, Great Australia Pit, they've got the Orphan Shear. And what we've actually found is that as we talk to people in town and through town, there's copper all through Cloncurry itself, and it continues to the north. We've actually found copper on our verge. So I was mowing the lawn one day, and I noticed that I was seeing some iron oxide there, so I pulled out the gun and tested it, and it runs at half up to 1.5%. So the copper is all through that region, and the mystery has always been, where did it come from? And we're about to find out based on our own thesis. Next slide, please. And there it is. So we've done an awful lot of work on this. We started back in August, September, working with a very good geophysicist who knows this area intimately. He's worked on Ernest Henry amongst others for years. So he came up with this when he did some inversion work on it. He has a very powerful computer, which we're starting to love dearly, and he's come up with this massive magnetic anomaly, which basically starts underneath Mongoose, a little bit heads up towards a shear, and then it plunges to the northwest under the town. So that's where we're heading, and that's why we're getting a bit of excitement, I think, around the stock and what we're up to, because there's some very broad, strong similarities to Ernest Henry. Next slide, please. Gravity results were announced this morning. So we ran a gravity program over this as well, because the regional data was based on 1 kilometre by 1 kilometre. We've done 100s by 100. So forgive that map there, because that's actually very technical. It's kind of hot off the press from our geophysicist and Ed working on it. But basically it's telling us the same message. It's telling us that there's something going on within this system. It's very similar to Ernest Henry, and we're getting an overlap of the gravity and the magnetics, which is really what we were looking for, and that's helping us with the siting of our hole, because it's a deep hole and it's an expensive hole, and we're going to give it the best shot to try and pick something up on the way down in this first crack at it. Next slide, please. This is my favourite slide, because for those of us who can't think in 3D, fundamentally this is showing you that deep plunge, which is coming into that permit to the north where we own 100%. And we've stopped mapping it at about 3 kilometres. And in some parts it's between 500 metres and 1 kilometre wide. So it is massive, and we're looking forward to getting stuck into that shortly. Next slide, please. Another slide for those as just a schematic on how it might work, where we get the breccia pipe with the magnetics and the crackle zone, which is interesting. The only holes drilled, the deepest hole drilled here, I should say, are down to about 200 metres true depth. So nobody's really tested this. In fact, I'm not sure anyone has ever done the work that we have done on it geophysically. Next slide, please. Just a little bit about the money. This diamond hole we budget at 600. We've already spent the gravity survey and the ground magnetics at Mongoose West. We've got around 1.9 million in cash available, including the CEI grant, which was gratefully received. We put a fair bit of work into that, and we were the recipients, one of 7, I think, that got the 300 grand total. They're wishing us well and urging us on. Next slide, please. Tommy Creek is another permit, part of the CJV, which we haven't commenced earning into yet, but it has what I would have to say a monster graphite prospect. It's in that outline there with that white, the Tommy Creek graphite shift, and you can see through there. We went through, sampled it. Glencore stuck one hole into it, got some really high grade stuff. Needs more work. But it's something that we're paddling along in the background, in particular with our neighbour, who, again, we've got a contiguous ore body there with another party. So we're talking to them about how we might be able to unlock the value. It's also got rare earths and some uranium, and there's some old copper workings, which we haven't got to yet because, frankly, we were out there in November last year. It started pouring with rain. It was about 42 degrees. And I couldn't walk up that last hill. So we'll be going back there probably when we get some time over the next 4 or 5 months. Next slide, please. This is North Isa, which I touched on, and we're definitely going to do more work there, particularly Tulloch. Tulloch has a lot of zinc showing around. It's got a lot of shows up there, very big, broad shows, which are well above background. So it is interesting. In fact, that whole area is interesting because it's the old Peru fault, now called the Western, and it just forks off from the Mount Isa fault and sort of heads up to the north, where the Isa heads off to the northwest. We're quite fascinated by this because there's been a fair bit of work done on it, but not a lot of holes. So we'd like to do more there, and it's something that we own 75% of. Next slide, please. So we've got to the end of the presentation. I guess there's a fair bit of market interest in us. We've got a very big hole coming our way. We're not a one-trick pony though. We've got the drilling coming at Mongoose West, the other work out at North Isa, plus a fair bit in the background that we want to get stuck into on the other permits. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Rob. As you said, you have seen a fair bit of market interest, and you've clearly got a whole lot of audience interest based on the number of questions that have come through. So we might just jump straight into those, and sorry if some of them seem technical and probably more technical above my pay grade, but we'll get through them as we can. Mongoose Deeps looks like a very big and interesting target, and certainly has the market's attention, which we touched on. Why haven't we seen it before? And will you update the market on hole progress on a hole-by-hole basis?
Yeah, very good question, because we kind of asked ourselves that as well. Why hasn't anyone got hold of this data? I guess we went out, not to market, but we went out to the guys in the area and asked what geophysicists should we go to reprocess this data, do some inverse work, and try and make sense of these big mag anomalies that we see coming down. It's like a boomerang, comes down from Henry down, and it sort of sweeps around underneath the Curry, and we're in the middle of it. And so we picked a guy called David McSweeney, who, as I said, I think he's got a supercomputer down there. I'm not sure if he's doing a bit of Bitcoin mining on the side, but we've been, really excited and happy with the work that he's done and generated. And as I said, he came recommended by a number of other parties, including Glencore, who said that he is your guy to do this work. So why hasn't it done before? I don't know. I mean, if we drill the hole there, and we do get lucky and we hit something pretty decent, then I guess a lot of people will be scratching their heads. But what it will do, it may open up the area again, because we've got these shows all through a couple of our permits there. It's not, this looks quite a little bit unique, but there's lots of others and they need to be drilled.
Does it show the advancement, I suppose, of science and technology, and how applying that to sometimes historical or even recent data makes a massive difference to understanding the mineralogy that you're dealing with? We've seen it a lot in Western Australia in particular, Fraser Range and other areas where, just changes to technology, changes to research techniques and exploration techniques open up new areas that were seemingly forgotten.
Look, I think so to a certain extent, and I have to be frank, I over my journey, because I'm not technical, but I've been around it for 30, 40 years. Over my journey, I often glaze over when geophysicists start talking about their colours and their lines and all the rest of it. I think what I've found with Dave is the power of his computer. I think to process something like this, 10 years ago might have taken 2 weeks. He can do it in a day. In fact, for us, he reprocessed Ernest Henry gravity in a day, so we can compare it, right? So it's quite phenomenal, and I think the thing about that power is that he's able to go in and clean up, so he can look at things that got a false read, I can fix that, and da-da-da. So it doesn't take weeks anymore. If you get somebody like Dave, you can do it very quickly. So a bit of free advertising for Dave if anybody's got something out there, because he's incredibly excited, having done so much work on Ernest Henry over his journey as well.
And when we see the lights dim in Mount Isa, we know that the Renegade information is being reprocessed.
Yeah, well, he's actually in Newcastle, so he's actually in the heart of coal country. But mind you, they've got a problem with their power too there, I believe. But
and in terms of what follows Mongoose Deeps, what's the next part of the plan?
Mongoose West for sure, trying to extend Mongoose deposit. If we can make that bigger, we're trying to work in and help the boys next door at True North to get as many oxides as they can, plus all the sulfides that we see in these holes as well. And that's a nice walk up target for us, which we've fine-tuned with the recent mag survey, which I'll be very frank, gave us better data than we expected. We're very encouraged by what we saw, because we couldn't see much at surface, unlike Mongoose itself, and it's only about 300 metres away, but it went under cover. So, we're out there digging holes and all the rest of it. But as I said before, I'm getting old. I'm only capable of doing so much of that.
And what about the other exploration plans across the wider portfolio?
Yeah, definitely over to, just reiterating, definitely over to North Isa. Our friends at Glencore are very focused, it appears, on zinc. So we've had a chat to them about Tulloch and the models that we're going to work on there. We've got a nice working relationship with the exploration team up there, led by Trevor Shaw, and they're very open. And as I said, they're willing us on here, because if we have a nice big discovery at Cloncurry, everyone's a winner. We talk to the. Clearly we've got great relations, I think, with pretty much every landowner we deal with through that area. The Mitakootie and the Kalkadoon, they're great. I was in the mayor's office on Monday, and he's going, this would be fantastic for the town and for the area, and it'd give it that lift. It'll be great for a lot of things up there, and including things like the Copper String project, which the Queensland government's, I think, getting going now. So a discovery there would be great. But on the other permits within the CJV, which I don't have time to talk on, we see other prospects and projects which Glencore's touched, way too small for them, but really in our wheelhouse size-wise as a junior. And we see a lot of stuff that Ian was talking about, because we've got some permits up around those guys, more in the Western Succession over towards Isa. We see one over there which we'd really like to get stuck into as well, and we might actually get there this season, depending on time. But if we hit something big at Cloncurry, I suspect I suspect we'll be kept pretty busy there for a while.
Just talk us through the ownership structure for Mongoose Deeps and the target to be drilled. How much will the company own if the drill is successful?
So roughly 20% odd sits on the Terra joint venture ground, which we're earning into. 80% sits on the 100% owned permit. So I think, and a little bit sits over on True North as well. So everyone gets a little bite of the cherry there. If this comes in, clearly the stakeholders in Renegade will be happy, but I think everyone will be happy. So that's what we're about. You know, we want everyone up in our region to have success, or at least one of us to have some success somewhere. I don't care who it is, because, you know, we'll be able to keep funding these activities because it is so fertile. Quoting Ian again, wherever we look, we find copper. That's a problem. It's not like WA where, you know, if you see it, you see a little bit of outcrop, look here. Sometimes it's a problem, and we've had, you know, similar issues at Mongoose. We went, crikey, how did we get that? But we follow up and we don't get that, but then we move along and then we pick it up again. So it's not straightforward, but there's so much copper through there, and I think it's still not well understood by all of the geology teams out there. So it's a big learning curve. It's going to take money, but I think as a district, I think it's one of the best areas in the world to be.
One of the best areas in the world to be. A collegiate approach, willing success, not just for yourself and your shareholders, but those around you. As you say, anyone getting success unlocks value for everybody else and a greater understanding of the mineralised zones they're working through. So we wish you every success. We look forward to following the company with interest. Strong news flow, high impact drilling, things shareholders love. You've caught the market attention, and clearly attention that is well deserved, and will follow the company as it continues its exploration plans. Rob, thanks for your time.
Thanks very much. Thanks for listening.
Well, thanks, Rob. And as I said in my introduction, the purpose of this webinar series is to give you the opportunity to engage directly with companies that are on your watch list, and to give you ideas of companies that you might want to potentially add to your watch list. And I'm sure we found a few today. Look at your watch list. Let us know if there are any companies on there you want to hear from, or let us know about companies you've been thinking about adding to the watch list and you just want that little bit more research and a greater understanding. Thanks to John for his insightful keynote, and to each of the company presenters for the introduction to your respective companies and the value proposition they represent. We'll see you all in a few weeks' time. Thanks everyone for your time.